Rick, thanks so much for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it. So, Rick Gallant, could you describe a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and experience that? Why are you here today?
Sure, Vaughn. Well, literally we're here because I've been a teacher in the Corning Paine and Post School District for 17 years, and this is actually my classroom. I've been teaching actually for 35 years and coaching across the country. I grew up in Central Ohio, went to college there for a little bit, went to college in Idaho, got a master's degree in Idaho, went from there to Washington and back, and so ultimately we wound through quite a few places. My wife just retired as a teacher in Gallatin, Pennsylvania, which is a small district in north central Pennsylvania, and I've been in Corning for the past 17 years.
Mm-hmm. So what brought you back to the Corning area after going out to Ohio, Washington, Idaho, and all that?
So I had coached all those years and kind of got tired of coaching. We were in Central Ohio, and we bought a whitewater rafting company down in Wellsboro, actually, which we have since sold, and we kind of picked a spot kind of halfway. I was teaching in Corning at the time, got the job as well, and my wife was in Gallatin, so we kind of had a spot halfway, and then she has literally just retired at the end of May, and we moved up here in anticipation of being a little more close to the big city for her.
Mm-hmm. So you are running for Congress. What is your background public service-wise?
So I'm on the board of directors of the New York State United Teachers. I'm starting my second term. I actually represent an area that's very similar to the 23rd Congressional District. I represent from Waverly to the other side of Dunkirk. The only areas that we don't actually represent, that I don't represent, are Ithaca and Geneva, and kind of along that line. So I've been doing that as a statewide office holder. It's a statewide election, and been elected twice. That's really the only elected public service I have. I was the teachers president, Corning Teacher Association president here for 3 years, and did some other things, been active in union work for quite a bit longer than that.
Mm-hmm. So what made you decide to run for Congress then?
My biggest concern was the representation or lack thereof of the families in our region. Everything that I have done has really revolved around communities, the kids, the families, their families, and the different services, and I don't think that the current government is doing a very good job of servicing these families and kind of holding their end of the deal on the promises and the budgeting.
Mm-hmm. And we'll come back to some more of these questions later. But to you, in your opinion, what are the requirements to be a congressman?
I think the biggest requirement is to be a person kind of the people, willing to listen, willing to go out, meet all the different constituencies, and listen to what it is that they really think needs to be done. And then once you hear all that, and again, you know, as a teacher, we always talk about there's a difference between hearing and listening. So once you listen and you understand what those concerns are, that you kind of sort that out, and you go back and to Washington and you fight for those concerns. And I think that's the biggest disjoin we have right now, is that people are hearing those concerns, but I'm not sure they're listening to them, and they certainly aren't going back to Washington and acting on them.
Mm-hmm. So for you, that is the difference between being a congressman and being a good congressman?
Definitely. I have no long-term political aspirations whatsoever. I want to serve the people of the district as best they deserve to be served. I'm one of them. I'm a normal person. I'm a citizen politician as opposed to a politician, and I think that's the difference right there.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now switching into some of the policy questions, we're going to go over a broad range of different topics, everything from the environment to domestic issues and what forth.
Okay.
And just trying to scrape the top of
Sure.
kind of what are your views across the board here.
Sure.
So to start off, environment. Number one, does climate change exist? And if so, what are some ways you could see Congress taking proactive steps to combat that while also keeping in mind your constituents here in the district?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, we rely on tourism a good bit, and yes, climate change is real. Mm-hmm. At least most scientists believe it is. I'm inclined to believe most scientists, and so that's a real problem. I think from a congressional standpoint, we need to reinstate monies to the EPA that are getting budgeted away. I think we need to make sure that we continue to belong to the Paris Accord so that we can continue to be a worldwide leader in kind of fighting for environmental causes. The Great Lakes and what's happening to them is something that should be very near and dear to our hearts in New York State. And then you also have a lot of clean and green energy systems that are being developed and being constructed here in New York between the wind and a lot of the solar things. And I think that Congress can make it easier to not only do the research on those and the development on them, but also to ease or grease the skids to get them actually implemented as well.
Mm-hmm. So some of the counter argument would be for some on the other side to say, yes, we believe in climate change, but there are other priorities. In the district, what would some of your response to that be in ways we can work both sides of that issue there?
So if the future of humanity isn't a priority, which I believe the climate issue and environmental issues directly impact, I'm not sure what would be a priority. Mm-hmm. So that would be my first response to that should be everybody's, survival of the species should be everybody's number one priority. I don't think having clean, green energy is going to be at the risk of necessarily any of our constituents. We do not have much of a fossil fuel economy based up here at all. I know that in north central Pennsylvania they've been going through a lot of issues with the fracking. I don't disagree in this case with the governor that I don't think fracking is necessarily environmentally proven to be safe, and I don't think we have enough longitudinal data on that. So I really think that, again, to go back, survival of the planet should be everybody's number one priority. It's hard to figure out that isn't true, and then we need to kind of work from there.
Mm-hmm. Switching to the Second Amendment. So there's a broad range of spectrum for Second Amendment issues. Mm-hmm. Where on that spectrum do you sit from everyone should be open carry to take away everyone's guns?
Probably somewhere in the middle. I know that's not the answer you wanted, but I believe in responsible gun ownership. I believe in background checks for mental health issues and some of those kinds of things, but I don't necessarily believe that everybody should be able to have guns in the streets and have to check them at the saloon when they walk in the end of Dodge. So I'm kind of in the middle on that, but I am all for responsible gun ownership.
Mm-hmm. Moving to economic issues, a lot of talk over kind of an isolationist economic policy versus being engaged globally. Where do you sit, and looking at both the district and the role you would have in Congress, what are your opinions on economic approaches?
Well, I think we need to, the day and age of actually being an isolationist, I think, are over. It's a worldwide economy through the communications, through the networking of distributions, and I think we need to continue to encourage fair trade agreements. I don't think we can put ourselves at a disadvantage, because by putting ourselves at a disadvantage, we're putting our people and our manufacturers and our workers at a disadvantage as well. But I think we need to have fair trade programs that work for everyone, not to be confused necessarily with fair trade, but we need to have programs that work out best for both sides.
Mm-hmm. Looking at the district in particular, some, especially those who voted for Trump and Bernie Sanders, a more populist movement, would almost feel they've been left behind. From an economic perspective, what are a few things you could initiate or get behind in Congress that would help those people, as the Trump voters would say, make America great again?
Well, one of the things that I do agree with the president on is that we need to have a major upgrade in our infrastructure. And by having a major upgrade in our infrastructure, that's going to put a lot of people in our district to work. Mm-hmm. It's been almost since the FDR days of the WPA since we've had a massive renewal of our roads, of our bridges, of our dams, and those things. And I think we need to really focus on that. And I think that'll give people of our region a chance to have a lot of jobs. One of the things that I'm a proponent of is tuition-free college and trade school and tech school. And by having people that are tradespeople that are trained to do all these things, that we can have good, decent jobs at good wages for them when they get out and they'll stay in the area.
So switching to education, we're here in a school. You are a teacher by trade. So looking at the national, the federal level of education policy right now, you can almost...
Sorry about that.
Phone's off in the classroom. Come on, Rick.
Yeah, exactly. We should have checked. Let me get it real fast and I'll go back.
That's all right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's all good. So looking at education from a federal level, there seems to be a divide of, do we look at education and the system as it is, continue to try and revolve it, or do we try new things and move funds and support away from those to other things like charter schools that might be a little bit more experimental and might try a different route? Where do you sit on that spectrum, and what is your thoughts on the federal point of education right now?
Well, first of all, taking $9.2 billion out of the public school budget basically nationwide is a horrific thing to do to the kids of the United States, including the kids of New York and including the kids of the 23rd District. Not only taking $9.3 billion or $9.2 billion out of that, but then using it for school vouchers, which is a code word for segregated schools, using it for charter school tuitions, again, same thing. Using it to give to people who are already rich is just inexcusable. So you can see where I stand on that. I am not a fan whatsoever of the Secretary of Education. We should have somebody, if indeed we're going to have a Department of Education, we need to have people that are at least have some experience in public school education in that department. I don't think there's very many. By cutting that budget as well, you're taking away some of the best programs for kids. You're taking away or cutting back on after-school programs and before-school programs, so that kids don't have to be latchkey kids, that they have structured programs before and after school that they wouldn't have otherwise. You're taking away free and reduced lunches, not only during the school year, but this time when they're on summer vacation as well. That's should be almost criminal. These kids are not necessarily coming from poor families. They're coming from families where parents are counting on these free and reduced lunches. The budget also takes away social workers, counselors, psychologists, which is kind of the, in schools, which is kind of the front line of mental health awareness. By the referrals, a lot of the kids that we deal with use those services, and getting rid of those is almost unconscionable. So I think the current administration and the people that are supporting this budget are doing more to hurt public education in the United States than, I'm 59 years old, than any group I can ever remember my entire life. And I have been a teacher for 37 years. My dad was a teacher. My dad is a retired college professor that trained teachers. My mom is a retired teacher, so our family's been doing this for a long, long time, and I think I have a pretty solid perspective on that.
Mm-hmm. You hinted there, or you said there, that the Department of Education, if we would have a Department of Education, where do you feel on the control of education standards from the federal government in general?
So this gets a kind of an interesting situation, Vaughn, because in general, education is a state job. It's a job of the states to run the schools and educate the kids. What's happened is we've gotten a Department of Education that's kind of decided that they're going to, and it started under the Obama and actually the Bush with the race to the top and some of the Common Core principles, that they wanted to insert the federal government in some standards, and that didn't really work very well, because inevitably what happens is, and it's going on till today, that instead of asking people to do this every day, the best way to fix it, they ask people who own corporations who are rich or who are donating to them. So I think a lot of the programs that are run through that in the Department of Agriculture that do some of the lunch programs and the milk programs, I think it's important to have an oversight. I think it's important to have a certain standard so that we can hold all states to it. But how much we get involved in the day-to-day business of schools from a federal government, I have some real questions about.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to healthcare, a very, very prominent topic recently, especially as the House and the Senate are moving through with their plans for the American Health Care Act to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. So assuming by the time you would potentially take a seat in Congress, assuming the American Health Care Act or some form of it was passed, what would for you be some individual items to reform within the healthcare system that you think would best serve your constituents or potential constituents here in the district?
Well, when you start, you can look at Medicaid, which is kind of both a budget issue and American or the Health Care Act issue, but Medicaid affects or benefits kids from the age of, basically newborns until they die. So I think that we have to be very, very careful about slashes to Medicaid. I think that everyone should have an opportunity if they're sick to go to the doctor. Well, I think everybody should have an opportunity if they want preventative care to go to the doctor without worrying about how much it costs. So I am a firm proponent of low or no care health care. People need to be able to go without having to worry about whether they can buy their kids lunch the next day. That shouldn't have to be a values judgment. It shouldn't have to be like that thing we used to have to do about, there's 8 spots on a rowboat and you got 10 people who gets it, who doesn't. And that's kind of what we're setting up, I think, with this. I think that by cutting back some of the Planned Parenthood services, that women are losing out on opportunities to get low or no care preventative health care and cancer screens. I think what kind of happened, to be quite honest with you, and it's still happening because nobody knows what this thing's going to look like because, like 6 dudes are, hiding in a closet and figuring it out, is that we need to have people who truly know what they're talking about when it comes to healthcare on a large scale. We need those people to figure out how to do this, not 6 guys in suits. And that's another thing that really concerns me, is that we also have those same 6 guys in suits deciding what kind of choices my 2 daughters have to make based on reproductive care, or anybody else's daughters. I don't think that we have any place in talking about women's reproductive health either.
Mm-hmm. Any specific technicalities, any technical measures in there? A lot of things are brought up as far as different amendments to Constitution, not to the Constitution, to the existing bill that you would feel strongly about, ways to get it to that point of one care for all. Yeah,
so if we went back and looked at the Affordable Care Act, which certainly has some issues as well, I think the alternative is that instead of just taking that and throwing it out and starting with another one, I think the better alternative would take that one, get a room full of experts, figure out how to best fix it so that we had people that would still willing to insure people if that's the way we wanted to go, or B, figure out a way instead of giving them money back to actually taxing the people that have the most money and having them help support the good of the whole of the country in paying for basically a single payer or a Medicare model for all. And I think that's doable. With that, again, it all comes back to that we're kind of in this thing together, and we need to make sure that we ensure that everybody has an opportunity to get health care when they need it.
Mm-hmm. So to pick on one example you mentioned there is drug prices.
Mm-hmm.
What do you view as a way to reduce drug prices from the congressional level?
So my oldest daughter is just finishing up her PhD in public health, and one of the things that we talk about a lot, if you had a single payer or a Medicare for all model, and in turn the government or some part of the government was in charge of purchasing drug plans for everybody in the United States, the cost of these drugs would go down automatically by itself, because then we're dealing with one entity. And if we had the same government or entity working on the research of those drugs, the prices again would come down. The high cost of drugs is basically self-controlled by the drug companies. We have no other way around it. They are really the ones that are controlling how long it is till something goes generic. They're the ones that are controlling. We had the issues, in the past year with the incredibly inflated prices on drugs. So I think we need to get more involved in that. And you've seen in other countries, the cost of pharmaceuticals are much lower because it all goes through one place.
Mm-hmm. So switching to immigration. The district is a largely agricultural district. You have a lot of industries, grapes, dairy, and fruit. So what a lot of the labor for those farms, almost 50%, a Texas A&M study rated at one time, is migrant labor. Immigrants who may be legal or illegal. Looking at both agriculture and immigration, what are some ways you would look at to reform the immigration system?
So yeah, I think undocumented workers in this case, because they are working and they're a very, very integral part of our district. I've talked with a lot of people about this who are concerned about finding people to work on their farms or in their vineyards because of this, because of the ICEs, that is basically deporting them left and right. I think there needs to be a pathway to citizenship. I think we need to provide every opportunity for anybody that comes to this country, documented or undocumented, but it becomes a positive part of our working society, to have a chance to become a citizen. And you go back to the dreamers that through no fault of their own found themselves here and are productive members of society going to college. They should have an opportunity to become citizens as well. And I think in our particular area, it's a huge, huge issue. Our country was founded on, bring me your the huddled masses, yearning to be free. And I think, again, we're going away from that. We can't, we need to build bridges, not walls.
Mm-hmm. Looking at social issues, the opioid crisis, very pertinent in a lot of urban and rural centers of the district. There was a very large bust by federal authorities up towards Ithaca a few weeks ago. Looking at that from a federal level, what are some policy ideas or initiatives that you could get behind to combat that or stint that as best you can in the district?
I think, interestingly enough, everything seems to be kind of connected. And you go back to the pharmaceutical questions that we had, that a lot of times people's first encounters with opioids are, through prescribed painkillers. And I think we need to be very, very careful and find alternatives to opioid painkillers, which, if we're going to put money in research, that's certainly one place. I just was reading the other day that the number of emergency room and hospital visits in the last 10 years through opioids is up 100%. And that's, a statistic like that is incredible. And you hit it right on the head when you said we're not just talking about urban areas. We're talking about Steuben County. We're talking about Allegheny County. We're talking about Yates County. We're talking everywhere in the district and everywhere across the country where it's reaching crisis levels. And we need to really step in with the pharmaceuticals and find a way to do this without opioid-based painkillers.
Mm-hmm. On the topic of voting, government reform, a lot of citizens groups have grown up. You have United, Rise Up, Indivisible, and other citizen groups like that. Since the 2016 election, one of their big issues, and from the populist movement in general, is campaign finance. Where do you sit on accepting donations from large PACs, super PACs, and corporate financing of elections?
Well, first of all, I think that all federal elections should be publicly funded. I don't think that the onus, and unfortunately we've seen that only the wealthiest amongst us, can afford to run for office. We look at what went down yesterday, upwards of $50 million being spent on, one congressional seat. That's ridiculous. And what happens is it keeps the common person out of government because they just can't afford to run for it. So the first thing is I believe we need public financed federal campaigns. Second of all, ideally it would be great to get $25 from everybody that supported my view in the district. Practically speaking, that's probably not true, although I've gotten a lot of support from teachers and people in education, as you would expect. I'm not going to say never to never, but I'm certainly, the people that I'm reaching out to right now are all individuals.
Mm-hmm. Looking at that from a realistic standpoint, obviously publicly funded elections aren't the norm in the U.S. or at all in the U.S., and you are running in a race. Looking at that, some of the other candidates have discussed not accepting donations from large corporate financiers. Is that something that you've considered as well?
I don't expect to get any donations from any large corporate sponsors. Our opponent has already gotten all those. When you look at the first 50 donations are from insurance companies. I don't anticipate any of the rest of us will be getting any of those. I just don't anticipate getting any of those. Again, I'm not going to say no to anything, but I'm not going to say yes to anything either. I think we have to follow our conscience on an individual basis and go from there, and I'll feel good about that.
All right. So civil rights, community policing, a big topic, especially with several verdicts that were delivered in the last few weeks. Where do you stand on the line of supporting police and community policing, and also paying attention to the civil rights issues that have risen out of some of these situations?
Well, I support our public employees. I support our peace officers, my nephews, Ohio patrolmen. I support everything that they do. I stand with my brothers and sisters from a public employee standpoint, and the fact that as teachers and police officers and firefighters, that we are all public employees. And just like every now and then you come across a teacher that may be a little off kilter, the same thing probably happens in that field. But we're certainly, and I would never, ever, ever condemn a whole group because of one person, and the stresses that they're going through are stresses that I can't relate to as a teacher, even though we have some doozies in this job as well, but nothing like they have to face. So then it becomes an issue where we really need to work together with law enforcement, as a community, as communities, and I really like the fact that when you see more and more law enforcement agencies putting people in schools or DARE programs, or we have resource officers in each of in the high school and the middle school here, so that kids and citizens can see that the police and the firefighter and the state patrol and the sheriff's office, that those are normal people, that they're human beings, that they go home from work to their families, and they go fishing and they go play golf, and I think the more we can involve everybody together, the better off it's going to be. It's going to be an issue. You talk about civil rights, and civil rights are civil rights. That's exactly what they mean. They mean that as citizens we have these rights, and those rights cannot be tainted or crossed. We have to uphold those rights, and that's the job of the police as well, to uphold those rights on both sides.
Mm-hmm. And last topic, pointed question, foreign policy. So the Middle East is a very dynamic place right now. Some have suggested a full withdrawal or a more, again, isolationist approach to the Middle East. Others have proposed going back in there, taking action. Where on that spectrum do you fall? And are there ways that this can be a better situation for both of the people there and the people back at home?
So this is a very difficult, very difficult situation. I am never in favor of putting anybody in harm's way. I appreciate the service of men and women, throughout our history. I appreciate the service of the kids, and not just kids anymore, the people, that are laying their lives on the line every day. We have kids that have come through here who have, decided for whatever reason to serve their country, and I support, their decision 100%. I would never put them in harm's way without having a really, really, really good reason, and I'm not sure we've got a really, really good reason right now. I think that we have to work this stuff through with a more of a civil tone, with more, to use an old term, more of a détente kind of a thing, where we can work this out together, again, for the good of the whole. And when I talk whole here, we're talking about the whole world. And I think that we need to understand that we're much more alike than we are different, and that we have to work this out. And I think we've got to start by doing it with talking with each other, instead of puffing our chests out and seeing who makes the biggest shadow.
Mm-hmm. Some might say America has a role over there to intervene with things such as the refugee crisis or other humanitarian issues. What would you say to some criticism on that point?
I would say that's an entirely different question. So America does have a role in that. America has a role of being the leader of the free world, of, again, ensuring that the good of the whole is always our final mission. And if we need to help people out by bringing them to the United States because they're displaced from their country, we need to do that. We need to do that with open arms. Again, that's always been our policy. If we need to do it by putting our foot down by human rights violations of other regimes or countries, we need to do that as well. So we still have to play our role as and I know this may not sound as moral big brother, if you were, and by big brother I mean big brother like my big brother's going to take care of me, and I think we need to still fill that role, but there's a line between doing that from a kind of a moral standpoint and getting involved because what we think is right, and we're going to inject that into you government-wise.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's it for the topic-related questions. Now I want to get into a few specific to you and your
Sure.
run. So in your Twitter bio, you call yourself a tempered radical. Could you explain and elaborate a little bit more what exactly a tempered radical is and what that means?
So I tell people all the time that kind of my politics are practical progressive. It's interesting, in quotes, as you get older. I think you tend to see things from a bigger picture. I, back in the day, would have been much more radical than I am now, but just like anything else, you know how you temper something is by pounding it over and over and over again with a big hammer. I've been pounded over and over again with a big hammer, and so now I have been tempered. I feel that I'm very socially progressive. I have some more practical ideas on some other things, I think, which fits nicely into our district because we have such a diverse group of opinions on a lot of different things. And so I think that actually melds quite nicely with the people at 23rd.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any worries about giving yourself that label of a tempered radical? Worries that might be construed at all?
No, not at all. Mm-hmm. I think when people meet me and when they talk to me, they're going to realize that, no, I'm just like they are. For the most part, you know, I'm a guy that's they can talk to. I'm not a guy that was throwing Molotov cocktails at admissions buildings back in the day. I was after all that stuff. But no, I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. And as a matter of fact, you're the first person that's ever brought that up.
Please don't throw any Molotov cocktails. Unfortunately, I'll have to report on
We're
that.
good. We're good. I'm not sure how to even do that.
All right. So the district is a widely Republican district. Any Democrat would have an uphill battle either way, and a lot of the Republican parts of the district are very rural. Mm-hmm. So how do you get out there and relate to a lot of the people whose concerns, their way of life may be a little different than somebody centered to a more urban area, such as the Corning area?
Well, I've always been a small town person, actually, and it goes back to part of my NYSET role. I travel this area a lot. I know a lot of the teachers in those little towns. Schools are kind of the center of what goes on in that town. I spent a lot of time with those people. I think that when I get out and introduce myself to everyone, which I will, they'll find that I'm very relatable, that I'm very concerned about not only the problems of Ithaca and the problems of Jamestown and the problems of Dunkirk, but I'm also concerned about the problems of Belmont and the problems of Cuba and the problems of Casadega and all the little towns in between. So I think my biggest advantage is that relatability. I think that when people talk to me, they realize that there's a person I can trust. When they stand me up next to the other guy, I think they're going to say, would you rather believe a guy that comes from a family of teachers or a guy that comes from a family of bill collectors?
Mm-hmm. Now, Rick, one point I did want to address, and you did mention this earlier, that you're looking to move up here, but currently you are not a registered member of the district. Is that correct?
That is incorrect. So actually we moved in May the 19th.
Okay.
I have registered to vote as a member of the Democratic Party. I haven't got my card back, but I'm a registered member. I've also had to get a Social Security card so I could get my New York State driver's license, which I have ordered as well. My wife's driver's license just arrived in the mail yesterday, as a matter of fact. So no, that is not correct. So I want to point out, because this comes up a lot, that we have lived in northern Pennsylvania for 17 years. I have worked and served the citizens and kids of the Corning Paine and Post School District and beyond as a teacher and coach for the past 17 years. I drove the 42 miles every day so that my wife wouldn't have to drive the 42 miles. So she drove 15 miles to Gailton and I drove the other 42 up here. So I have been working and supporting New York State through taxes and through sweat equity for 17 years, and I don't feel like I have to apologize to anybody about that.
Mm-hmm. Are you worried that some might point out that you haven't been a registered member of the district for approximately 10 plus years?
So I would worry if I had just shown up and not been a part of this,
Mm-hmm.
I would worry about that. I'm sure some people will bring that up. The fact that you are tells me that others will. I think that in reference to Mr. Reed, if I have been coming to Corning every day for about 200 days a year for 17 years, I'll guarantee I've been in Corning way more days than he has. I've been in district, I would also guess, way more days than any of the other candidates can probably say for the most part. So I don't feel bad about it at all. I've been a part of this community for 17 years. I've coached at all levels. I've supported businesses. I've paid my taxes. I have no problems with that.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate you clearing that up. I'm sorry, that was an incorrect statement.
That's okay. You're not the first to make it.
So I did want to end, and this is a question I'm asking all the candidates. Okay. Should you lose, should you not gain the nomination or lose in the general election, is there something you want to leave behind in your run for Congress? Is there something you want people to be able to walk away with and remember, oh, that's what Rick Gallant said?
So first of all, the relationship that all the Democratic candidates have with each other so far has been outstanding. And we say this all the time, that our opponents are not each other, our opponent's Tom Reed. So, through the course of this campaign, I know that we're not going to have any issues amongst ourselves. I would hope when it's all said and done, A, that I am elected, but B, that people would say, you know what, there is a guy that for want of a bunch of bazillionaires backing the other guy, there's a guy that we really could trust, there's a guy that we really could believe in, and when we met him, we said, you know what, he's a pretty good guy.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks so much, Rick.
Thank you, Vaughn.
I appreciate you.
You bet. You bet.
All right.